Unemployment, disappointment. What the White House is saying about the slowing pace of hiring. Coronavirus pandemic. The new development that could make one vaccine even easier to get. Amazing discovery. How a 14th century reliquary reappeared. And fatherly figure. How some Catholics are renewing their devotion to St. Joseph. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 7th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden defends the April jobs report. Employers added just 266,000 jobs. That is way below the roughly 1 million jobs that economists had predicted. But the president says he wants to put those numbers into perspective. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, reacting to that April jobs report in a speech today here at the White House, President Joe Biden said, quote, "We're still digging out of an economic collapse, and that his American Rescue Plan will play out over the course of a year."
President Joe Biden goes before the cameras.
Today's report just underscores, in my view, how vital the actions we're taking are.
The jobs report showed a sharp drop-off from just the month before.
We never thought that after the first 50 or 60 days, everything would be fine. Today, there's more evidence that our economy is moving in the right direction. But it's clear we have a long way to go.
And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said the report underscores what she calls the long-haul climb back to recovery.
But let me be clear. The 266,000 jobs added in April represent continued progress.
Despite the weak jobs report, stocks rallied this morning as investors see the Fed keeping interest rates low.
Mucho gusto.
Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris holds a virtual meeting with Mexico's president, the vice president acknowledging what she called the surge of migrants arriving at our shared border, adding that it will take a multilateral effort to make progress.
It is in our country's mutual interest to provide immediate relief to the Northern Triangle and to address the root causes of migration.
And on the COVID front, the COVID-19 response team saying today, quote, cases, hospitalizations, and deaths continue to fall. And they give a shout out to churches.
The Congdon Street Baptist Church and other churches in Providence, Rhode Island, have been using their existing phone trees to call community members about getting vaccinated, even offering to drive them to vaccination sites when they're ready.
Also tonight, and not far from the White House, of course, is the Treasury Department, which today announced an additional $21.6 billion in emergency rental assistance to help keep financially struggling Americans in their homes during the pandemic. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Pfizer is requesting full approval for its COVID vaccine from the FDA. The Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine currently has an emergency use authorization in the United States. The Moderna and Johnson & Johnson shots have the same limited FDA approval as well. A priority review for the new request would take 6 months after the FDA gets all necessary data. Separately, Canada will allow Pfizer's vaccine for ages as young as 12. India's neighbor Nepal is worrying about a severe coronavirus spike. Confirmed coronavirus infections have multiplied in Nepal from 300 to 9,000. Local officials report no more available hospital beds and oxygen supplies are scarce. Nepal is relying on vaccines supplied by India, Russia, and China. Japan's prime minister has announced Tokyo's coronavirus state of emergency will extend until May 31st. Tokyo officials asked for an extension as infections are still too high in the city ahead of July's Olympic Games. A drive-through coronavirus vaccine facility has opened in Metro Manila. The site provides China's Sinovac vaccine, which the World Health Organization calls efficacious for those under age 60, but could have severe side effects. The WHO has very low confidence in China's other Sinopharm option and has not approved it. Manila's president took that Sinopharm shot this week, but afterwards apologized and asked China to take back 1,000 doses. Israeli troops at a West Bank border station have killed 2 Palestinians, critically wounding a third. The 3 attackers reportedly shot at the base, provoking return fire. Settlement disputes in the West Bank have factored into other random shooting deaths during this week. More than 50 people have been hurt in clashes between Palestinians and Israelis after Friday Ramadan prayers in Jerusalem. These were the final Ramadan prayers at the Dome of the Rock before next week's celebration of Eid. Coronavirus closed the site last year. Restrictions were lifted this year. Authorities have been on alert due to religious tensions in East Jerusalem. A volcano in Indonesia erupted earlier today, sending ash nearly 2 miles into the sky. Mount Sinabung has erupted in the past, causing evacuations of nearby villages. There were no evacuations after the most recent blast, but people have been advised to stay at least 3 miles from the crater's mouth. Well, after more than 30 years of being missing, valuable church artifacts, including a stolen reliquary of St. Galgano, were recently discovered in Italy. EWTN Newsroom correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now. Colm, great to see you. So tell us about this remarkable story.
Great to see you too, Tracy. And yes, a surprising story and a very good news story, as the announcement was made that police in Sicily had raided the home of an antique collector and discovered a 14th century reliquary of St. Galgano, which had been stolen from a Catholic seminary museum 32 years ago in a small village in Italy's Tuscany region. Now, the item was seized by police near the city of Catania in the south of Italy, along with a medieval gilded crucifix and 6 silver chalices, which had also been taken from the seminary museum. The items are extremely valuable, particularly the reliquary of St. Galgano, which had originally been forged by goldsmiths in Siena and Rome over 700 years ago. Now, St. Galgano was a nobleman and a knight from the 12th century who, they say, after having seen a vision of Michael the Archangel, thrust his sword into a stone and became a hermit. And of course, that image of the sword stuck in a stone is very famous now all over the world.
Indeed it is. And, you know, really incredible to think that they found this after so long. Colm, how did this theft play out back in 1989?
It is incredible, Tracy, and this theft took place on the night of July the 10th in 1989, when under the cover of darkness, 4 men crawled through a window of the Montadioso Catholic Seminary Museum. They proceeded to bypass an armoured door by going through a hole in the wall, and they managed to escape with the 11 valuable and sacred items. And for the past 3 decades, their whereabouts were unknown until this raid, when they were uncovered by the Sicilian unit of the Carabinieri. That's the name of the Italian police force. Now, the Carabinieri have not released the name of the collector who was holding these artifacts, but they did say that he was not able to provide a valid explanation as to how he came into possession of them. And it's not known if they're going to bring any criminal charges against them in connection with the theft. One item that was stolen that night, it was a silver chalice dating back to the 17th century. That still remains missing.
And Colm, before I let you go, what was the reaction to this find? And do we know yet what will happen to these items?
Of course, a very positive reaction, Tracy, and Italy's Minister for Culture has promised that the items would eventually be returned to where they were stolen from. But in the meantime, a lot of restoration work is needed to be done, which will be undertaken by the Vatican Museums just behind me. Barbara Jada, who is the director of the Vatican Museums, she hailed the discovery as an unprecedented find and stressed that their value is not only historical and artistic, but is also very valuable from a devotional point of view. So now the Vatican Museum's Metals and Ceramics Restoration Laboratory, they will spend around 6 months working on the items to repair any damage incurred. They'll lead the conservation, restoration and maintenance before they will ultimately be returned home after being away for 30 years. Tracy?
Just incredible. Thank you so much, Colm. Colm Flynn, EWTN Newsroom correspondent. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, basic human rights. Lawmakers make a plea for international religious freedom. What effect it may have. An Indiana court has thrown out a lawsuit against the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. The suit was brought by a Catholic school teacher who was dismissed for entering into a same-sex union. The representative from Beckett says it is a major victory for religious freedom. A panel of federal judges has expressed doubt over whether North Carolina's ban on abortion after 20 weeks of pregnancy will be reinstated. The judges heard arguments yesterday. In 2019, the measure was deemed unconstitutional following a lawsuit from abortion providers. There is no timetable for when the panel will release its ruling. Well, a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is urging President Joe Biden to address global religious persecution. Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma was among the lawmakers who signed that letter. It called religious freedom one of the most basic human rights for all people, adding it is, quote, an area of sincere bipartisan support. Representative Henry Cuellar from Texas was among the Democrats who signed the letter. Joining us now is Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, director of the Conscious Project. Andrea, welcome. So good to have you back on. Let's talk a little bit more about this letter. In it, members noted the persecution of a number of religious groups, including the Uyghurs in China. And it also stated that due to China's hostility towards religious groups, that the U.S. has an obligation to respond. What do you think of that? And do you think it will have any effect on the White House and its policies?
Well, absolutely. I want to say just first off that this is a refreshing change from the divisiveness that we're hearing out of Washington these days. And it really shows that when we go to first principles like religious freedom, Americans can come together for the common good. This letter is really important, especially as 100 days have passed in the Biden administration, and we have a lot to be hoping for as far as American continued leadership on international religious freedom.
Andrea, I also want to touch on the Equality Act. It's framed as expanding anti-discrimination laws, but many say it also inhibits religious freedoms. Can you discuss that? And also, how do you see this all playing out?
Absolutely, Tracy. We are very concerned with the Equality Act for many reasons, some of them regarding kind of a distorted understanding of the human person and sexuality, but also for the legislating away of federal religious freedom protections, specifically the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Now, it looks like there is not enough support in the Senate to pass the act, although people should continue to contact their senators and show their disapproval for such sweeping legislation that disregards religious freedom. But it's also a reminder that if we want to be leaders on the international stage, we have to keep our house in order too when it comes to defending and encouraging a robust understanding of religious freedom here at home.
Andrea, earlier this week, Newsweek had published an opinion piece titled, "Could Religious Liberty Help End the Culture War?" That is. I want to get your take on that. And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, Tracy, it's a fabulous piece, and it's written by a member at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in D.C., Andrew Walker. He's written a new book on religious freedom, and the piece says that even though we look as if America is becoming a more and more secular country, we still have people who are people of faith and are committed to their beliefs. And as we encounter all of these battles in the culture war, protecting religious freedom is good for a robust discussion over these issues and protects the ability of Americans to live consistent with their beliefs and their conscience. That goes to our fundamental founding principles. And the piece, again, is a reminder that we can be peaceful even as we come into disagreements on these very delicate issues.
Andrea, we have probably about a minute left, but before I let you go, wondering if there's anything that you're following that you think would be important for our viewers to know.
Well, I think I've mentioned this on a couple times that I've been on, Tracy. Everyone should be paying attention to an important, critical case that the Supreme Court's going to decide at the beginning of the summer. It's Fulton versus City of Philadelphia. It deals with the Archdiocese foster care placement program and whether the Archdiocese can continue its 200-year-old foster care placement program without having to abandon teaching about traditional marriage. It's an important case. I think that the Supreme Court's going to hand a victory for religious freedom, and it's going to set a marker for how we can continue to go forward in service and in love.
Andrea, thank you so much for coming on today. We always appreciate your analysis.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Tracy.
Up next, Mind, Body, and Soul, what you can do to nurture and protect your mental health. And Year of St. Joseph, how he's helping some Catholics rededicate their faith. The month of May traditionally has been dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary, but it is also Mental Health Awareness Month, and our next guest says the two go hand in hand. Joining us now is Allison Ricciardi, founder and president of CatholicTherapist.com. Allison, good to see you. Welcome back. Mental Health Awareness Month, as we said, coincides with a traditional commitment to devotions to Our Lady during the month of May. Can you tell us about the significance there?
Sure. Well, who could be more emotionally healthy than Mary? And I think with what everybody's been going through, and we've been very reactive because of all the fear and all the, propaganda out there. What did Mary do? She pondered things in her heart. She didn't react. She pondered things. And I think that's something that we could all really learn from, to ponder in our hearts, to listen, get in touch with our hearts. What is our gut telling us? Because, a lot of things are not adding up today. And if we take that time in prayer and listening, we're going to be a lot healthier.
Absolutely. And also, I want to talk about our parishes. They're a source of both spiritual and social support. And after such an isolating time for all of us, what type of advice would you give those who are struggling to sort of reintegrate themselves into their faith communities? And can you also talk about the benefits of attending Mass in person?
Yeah, tremendous benefit there. I know a lot of people have been very afraid. Obviously, when COVID hit last year, there were a lot of unknowns. But what we've seen over the last year is that there's a 99% survival rate. So we've been through cold and flu season before. So I think that we need to make a conscious decision to not be afraid, to kind of say, I'm going back. Obviously be reasonable, take your precautions, particularly if you've got, compromised health or immunity. But I think we need to reconnect. We need to see faces if we can not wear the masks and be able to smile at one another. I think people have been so isolated and almost dehumanized that it's causing like this lack of empathy. So to make that decision to not be afraid, to choose faith over fear, and again, not being reckless, but being careful, washing your hands, doing all the, the normal precautions, but to recognize we've been through, cold and flu season before. And most people without treatment, there's a 99% survival rate, and there are treatments available. So I think, returning to Mass, there's certainly a big difference between receiving Jesus and doing a spiritual communion. Now, thank God we can do a spiritual communion, but obviously it's not the same thing. So I think that spending time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, if you're too afraid to go to Mass where there are a lot of people, maybe start going into the church during the day and sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament. If you're lucky enough to have exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, what a great way to just start really calming down, to be in the presence of Christ, and to ask Him to just renew your faith and take away that fear, because we need to start coming out of this. We need to start reclaiming our freedom, and we need to start reclaiming our faith. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I know you founded CatholicTherapist.com kind of as a way to help connect people with faith-based mental health resources. Can you talk about maybe the daily practices that you suggest to your patients in order to keep their spirits up? And are there some resources that you could kind of recommend to other people?
Sure. First of all, spending time in silence every day. We have a lot bombarding us. Turn off the news, turn on, not EWTN News, but turn off, all this stuff that's coming at us, and start spending time reading scripture, doing the daily Mass readings if you can't get to Mass, certainly praying the Rosary. I do have a free report on raphaelremedy.com, 8 Keys to Emotional and Spiritual Freedom. And, pivoting back to catholictherapist.com, everyone there is screened for faithful adherence to the magisterium of the church. And most are working online today because of everything that's gone on. So it's easier than ever to connect with somebody who shares your faith and is going to be able to bring that perspective because, God is our ultimate healer and he's our ultimate hope. And I look at, I think of Holy Saturday, what a terrible day that had to be. And yet it was followed by Easter Sunday. And I think we're all kind of, in Holy Saturday, in fear, hiding, not sure what to do or what's coming at us. But, when it gets to that point, that usually means that we're about to turn a corner. We have to have faith and hope because at Fatima, and we're celebrating that feast next week, Mary promised that her Immaculate Heart would triumph. So that you can take it to the bank. And that's been my hope going through this whole thing. As things seem to get darker in terms of all what we see, in terms of government control and everything, Mary told us her heart will triumph. And we need to trust in that. That's super, super important.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's wonderful. Before we let you go, we're running out of time, but I want to bring this up. Of course, Mother's Day is this Sunday, and I was hoping that you might share a memory of a mother who's special to all of us here, our foundress, Mother Angelica.
Oh, I mean, Mother Angelica, what strikes me about Mother, especially as so many people are transitioning and trying to kind of reinvent themselves, maybe they've lost jobs, their businesses have closed. Mother Angelica started EWTN at 58 years old with no media experience, with no technical experience. It is never too late to reinvent yourself, to have faith, but to listen to that calling on your heart. And certainly, Mother changed the world. Think about, the impact that she has had. And she did that out of a maternal desire to nurture the faith in others. So I think as we celebrate Mother's Day, we celebrate Mother Angelica, and I think we need to celebrate that God always, always has a plan, and whatever is going on, he will bring good if we're looking for it. If we're only looking at the negative, we're going to be very nervous. We need to look at the positive, and we need to have hope. And I think that was Mother's message, was hope in Jesus.
Yeah, beautiful. Allison, thank you so much. Thank you for what you do and for coming on and speaking with us today. We really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. God bless you.
And finally tonight, we are now 155 days into a special year dedicated to St. Joseph, declared last December by Pope Francis. The Holy Father's announcement comes 150 years after Pope Pius IX declared St. Joseph the patron of the Universal Church. Correspondent Mark Irons tells us more about the growing devotion to Joseph.
To you, O blessed Joseph, we consecrate our Diocese of St. Petersburg.
From Florida to California, Catholic communities around the country are calling on the guidance and intercession of St. Joseph.
And so it's so important that we turn to him because he wants to help us.
This past weekend on the Feast of St. Joseph the Worker, the Diocese of St. Petersburg, Florida consecrated parishes, schools, ministries, and the people of the diocese to St. Joseph. Father Ralph D'Elia says you can place trust in the earthly Father of Jesus.
He wants to help us in the same way our family does, in the same way our friends do. And so when we turn to him and we seek his intercession, he leads us to Christ.
Last December, on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, Pope Francis officially announced the following 365 days would make up a year of St. Joseph. In an apostolic letter, he wrote, "Each of us can discover in Joseph the man who goes unnoticed, a daily, discreet, and hidden presence, an intercessor, a support, and a guide in times of trouble."
A lot of amazing witness he gives to Christ, to following Christ.
Daniel Campbell teaches at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary in Denver. He says the difficult decisions Joseph made in Scripture, leading Mary and Jesus, show complete trust in God and provide proof of a strong prayer life.
So you don't ever actually read of him sitting down to pray, but it's the inference you can make that the only way you could respond with such absolute simple trust and absolute simple humility is if you are constantly keeping the presence of God and constantly in conversation with him.
In honor of this special year, Campbell will teach an online summer class focused on St. Joseph. It's open to people around the world.
Bottom line, I just hope people love St. Joseph and really take him as a patron.
And many Catholics, including student members of the Knights of Columbus at the University of Notre Dame, are entrusting themselves to St. Joseph's care this year by making a 33-day consecration. It involves short readings and prayers.
He's like the epitome of a strong Catholic man.
12 months prior to Pope Francis declaring this a year of St. Joseph, the Diocese of Charlotte had announced its own special year in honor of the foster father of Jesus. We asked Monsignor Patrick Winslow, the Vicar General and Chancellor of the Diocese, about the impact of the saint's intercession.
I think that the fruits that we experience are growth. We've experienced tremendous amount of growth since the founding of our diocese.
What would you say to other dioceses that are considering consecrating themselves to St. Joseph?
Well, I would say that he's a good friend in heaven to have on your side. Certainly he is for the universal church, but invoking him on a local level will always be to your benefit.
Since becoming prior of the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. 4 years ago, Father Aquinas Gilbo says his devotion to St. Joseph has increased.
And having to run a community and a religious community, one focused on the Lord, also a community dedicated to Our Lady, my thoughts just went naturally to St. Joseph. Like, how do I do this? You know.
Father Gilbo prays each morning in a small chapel dedicated to Joseph. He says we can rely on the saint just as Christ did as a child in Joseph's care.
He himself goes to Joseph. He places his infant self, under Joseph's protection.
Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Great story. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.